Hey everyone, it's Joffrey. I am here with fellow writer and poet Robert. And neither one of us is really hosting this. It's not really a show or regular thing. We're just two guys who have become friendly and perhaps even friends on Substack. And just want to talk about each other's work, share it with each other's subscriber list. So for those who don't know me, I am an educator and a writer. I have a literature ministry in South America for Brazil, and I'm a translator as well, an audiobook narrator. Because when I worked at Starbucks, people at the drive-through told me I had an amazing voice, and I believed them.
You do.
Thanks, man. Robert, what's your deal? Who are you?
My name is Robert Charboneau. I'm a Substacker, American poet living in Reno, Nevada, and I teach English and journalism at a small Catholic school. And hoping to maybe get a community of writers and poets going on Substack and kind of create something that maybe can flourish into something bigger. So
Yeah, I've been amazed at the reciprocity of the Substack community, of like the quality of, I don't mean quality like simply like higher and lower. I mean the actual tones, whether low or high. The qualities are always much more engaging and interesting than what you see on other social media. I'm actually like, I feel like it's 2005 and we're all blogging again, but like talking to each other. I love it.
Yeah, well, I came over from Instagram, and so the jump from Instagram to Substack and the quality of the writing is, it's night and day.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to have found a community on here that satisfies something that I was not finding on Instagram.
I haven't talked to so many poets, well, I think since I was in college or right after college.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's great. Well, so speaking of talking to poets, you posted a beautiful poem. Was it yesterday or today? Today it was this morning, called "The Sirens of the Live Stream." And I was struck by, well, it's something that has struck me about your other poetry I've read, which is that your rhythms are so smooth. But it stood out to me especially in this poem because it had a very strong meter and rhyme scheme, which if you had let that into my hands, I would have made it super driven and drummed and maybe even sing-songy. But with you, it was very, very smooth. And so I actually, maybe you'd be willing to read it to us. Would you be willing to do that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, let me pull it up here.
You got something of a Southern accent, and you claim you're from Nevada. What's the deal with that?
I was born in Charleston.
Yeah.
So that might be it. And I lived mostly on the East Coast. My dad was in the Navy, so we were up and down on the East Coast quite a bit. I lived in Florida and South Carolina and Connecticut and
well, I love the accent for whatever that's worth.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like a mutt mongrel accent, I'm sure, because I have adopted some of the West Coast eccentricities and. I feel like the West Coast is more my home now than the East Coast, but probably the East Coast comes out a little bit.
Some of those East Coast vowels are never going to leave you.
I like them too. They're very refined. They have a
I didn't want to blow too much smoke. I didn't want to be too flattering, but that was exactly my thought.
Okay. Yeah. So this is one that I had actually put in my last book that I self-published called Tower and City, and I thought maybe I'd just put a few of them up here because I didn't really like the sound of this one. It's called The Sirens of the Live Stream. The bedroom sirens abound on lives, entangling viewers adrift in dreaming. In nets of beauty, gaze and vibes, with voices sweet and smiles beaming. Give us all of your time, they chant, the devouring music of devotion. And forward on our phones we can't, wrecked on rocks of lost attention. We watch them watch themselves on screen, lured by love and lust and loneliness. They watch themselves being seen, the joy of beauty being noticed. Beauty in love with itself, beauty admiring its own reflection in the pool. The fate of youth, says the old story, for the crime of being nasty and cruel. They will be dead before they're old. Old age will seem no different than death. We too will drown in waters dark and cold when time is fled and there is nothing left. By different means come to the same end. They swallowed by insatiable conceit, and we, ignoring the dread portent, marooned on rocks of love incomplete.
Mm. I love that poem. It made me very sad, of course.
Yeah.
I really liked it. I mean, just the idea that, and it goes beyond like, what's the name of the service? I can't believe I'm blanking out. Everyone, OnlyFans. It goes beyond, like an OnlyFans thing into like to all of us, really.
Yeah, well, it was from like my experience using TikTok, because I tried to get into TikTok as another means to maybe recite some poetry and get like connected or hooked up with Book Talk there, and so I used it. Yeah, because it's one of the best places to promote your work, I think, now if you're a writer. Although maybe that's debatable. The audience there, I don't know how much they actually care about books rather than like the appearance of reading. And but anyway, I got on there and I became fascinated with all these other subgroups and these subcultures of people trying to gain an audience, but doing nothing more than maybe just like looking attractive and staring at the screen. And you would watch them and they don't really have anything to offer except their youth and their attractiveness. And you can tell that that's the thing that they care about the most too, because they're mostly looking at themselves in the camera.
Yes.
And you can see them looking at themselves, and the people are, hopefully somebody comes on and gives them a tip because that's what they really want, and they want more followers. But they really are fascinated with themselves. And I was like, oh, this is like a double trap, because you have like these sirens who will lure you in, whether they're like men or women. You'd see both of them on there, and they lure you in because they want your attention and they want your follow and your like and maybe your tip, and but they're also very narcissistic in that the only thing they really care about is like how attractive they are.
Yeah. I wrote a poem a few weeks back that seemed to resonate with people. That was, like dedicated to the Western hikikomori, like the Japanese hyper celibates, young men who just stay at home, and like your poem, like a really sad subject. But I was really struck by when I was like technically when I read this poem, your poem, I was struck by. I was imagining reading it out loud because I'm a fan of I think most poetry should be written to read aloud.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was reading it to myself on my cell phone, I was imagining reading it out loud, and I was realizing, even though I have a tendency to speed up as I read and to read very fast aloud, I could tell that this poem would have slowed me down, and that's very appropriate to the content of the poem. And then it also put me in mind of like, you have this one project that I've noticed you're regularly posting poetry for, that you write in blank verse, called The Men Who Think of Rome. Very cool project, very cool series. I mean, I'd love if you talk about it a little more at a certain point, but I have a specific question because of this Rome thing and then what you did technically with this poem and like slowing the reader down. I feel like your rhythms are very smooth. Like I go very Anglo-Saxon when I write usually. And I think a lot of my better, even more emotionally moving poems are they're kind of presented in a sort of in an almost silly sing-songy way, and it's the irony of the humor with something that's really sad or confrontational is what strikes the reader. But I end up going toward that, like really Germanic driving rhythms. I struggle being smooth is what I'm trying to say. But I wonder if, because I know you're a teacher, you're fascinated with Rome. I don't know if you've ever studied Latin, but you're writing about Rome. Is this smoothness from Latin or from liking Roman poetry? Like, what's the deal with that?
Yeah, well, I don't read Latin myself, other than, like a line or two if I really want to get into like the close reading or the research of maybe a specific word or phrase. But I don't read Latin myself. I think it comes for, at least in that last poem, that was, I'm a big fan of the Victorian poets in English. And so that one was maybe partly inspired by the works of Tennyson and William Morris. I think just Tennyson has like probably the best voice in English poetry, give or take a couple of poets, but I just love the sound of Tennyson's work. And it rolls and it has a cadence to it that I feel like I'm always trying to capture. And it is a smoothness. It's a buttery, smooth quality that it makes it seem so easy to read, like it falls or it slips out of your mouth. And there's something dreamy about the poem that I wanted to, I think the slowness and the cadence of the rhythm mimics this dreamy quality that I wanted to elicit. I'm trying to remember there's another poem. Oh yeah, James Russell Lowell. He has a poem called "The Sirens," which also has this kind of this quality to it too. But this kind
I don't think I recognize that name.
James Russell Lowell. He was I think he was one of those fireside poets. So same time period as like Tennyson, but just in America. You put him with like a
Longfellow.
Yeah, like a Longfellow, or the guy who did Thanatopsis, whose name is escaping me. William Cullen Bryant. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I love all that whole time period in England and in America, and I feel like I'm always trying to capture that voice. Like it's something that could be read to you, and there's almost something prosaic about it, but yet it's easy enough to be read as if it were prose, but yet it keeps that meter and it keeps that cadence, that regularity of that cadence throughout the whole poem.
Which you do exceptionally in this Roman series, the men who think of Rome, like that blank verse. It really is like you could put it in a paragraph, and some people might not notice the music. I mean, I think their souls would have to be dead, but they might not notice it. But because it is so smooth, and these are, the grammar is intact. They're the enjambment is completely like. The lines are just there to help the reader remember that it's like an iambic pentameter, usually, but that's all, right? You're just writing this verse prose.
Yeah, and you almost don't want them to notice when you're shifting those registers. Like I want to play on that, that shift from prose to poetry, so that you're reading it and you're listening to it and it sounds like somebody is just telling you a story, but then all of a sudden maybe there's a rhyme here or there, and then your brain picks up on that and it lights up and it says, oh, what was that? And then you fall back into the rhythm of the sentences, and you forget about it, but then it chimes up again. And I feel like playing against that, moving between the prosaic and the poetic is I think one of the best tools that like a poet has available to them that maybe a prose writer doesn't. Because as soon as a prose writer does it, it sounds out of place because you're expecting one thing and you're getting something. But when you're reading poetry, you can have both of them, and they both sound okay because you're in that mindset that you're reading poetry.
Right.
But yeah, I love that that style of like I think Frost has that.
Yes.
That prosaic style that yet like it somehow lines up and fits and sounds poetic.
I think some of the better American poets who are really good at doing that in a conversational kind of way. Like when I think of someone like Tennyson, there's like a classical, or even Yeats, I think could often be buttery. I like that word you used. But you know, there's a classical. It's not just the subject matter either. Like it feels to me, it feels smooth, like in a classical Roman way. But when Americans are like Frost, especially when he's telling a story, it feels every day now, you know, or 100 years ago. But you know, it's you know it's the same effect. I wonder if that maybe just comes down to simple word choice and subject choice. Another meaning of the word prosaic would be good to kind of describe like American subject choice, like orchards and blueberry bushes and winter sledding.
Yeah, certainly. Probably the subject has something to do with it, and maybe talking about Rome, you know, the subject matter I think lends itself to this kind of prosaic, almost sartorial kind of speech, and I noticed I could get to that if I got the lines just like slightly longer, so they weren't like pentameter, but they were like hexameter or heptameter. If you just add like a couple extra syllables, it makes the sound of the whole line seem more complex, but also still just as smooth. If you can keep that same rhythm, it's not too taxing when somebody's reading it. But it does sound, there's something Roman about adding like just a couple extra syllables to each of the lines, which I found that I've done on a bunch of these different pieces. God, I was reading, I'm reading Lucan. Do you know who Lucan is? Yeah, I'm getting through him right now, and his lines just stretch like across the page, and it gets exhausting to read them, at least in the translation that I'm reading from the Oxford Classics by Suzanne Brond, and very dense lines, very long lines, and is constantly like proclaiming things,
Right.
and trying to speak like in like epistolary language too, or epigrammatic language, and so every like sentence is almost meant to stand on its own. Which, if you have like a whole epic poem of that, it just gets taxing on you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, especially if that rhythm is relatively, even if it's like longer, more meditative lines. If it's tight, it actually can, like if it's tight rhythm, it can, instead of, I think that's one of the benefits of the short lines and the quick rhythms is that they can carry you. Sometimes, usually it's not the case. Sometimes a longer, heavier rhythm. I think I'd like to recommend a poem to you if you haven't read it yet. Algernon Charles Swinburne's "March, an Ode."
Oh, Swinburne, yeah.
It's an anapestic octameter.
Oh God!
But he uses it. One of the cool things about it is he uses it to he basically, like with old Anglo-Saxon poetry, you had those caesuras, like basically the lines were in two sections.
Yeah.
And there would be like one, in the first line there, or the first line there would be two alliterations, and then that same alliteration would be in that second part of the line.
Yep.
So he basically fills it with different alliterations and assonances throughout these lines. I'll read you 4 lines here. And now that the rage of thy rapture is satiate with revel and raven and spoil of the snow, and the branches that brightened are broken and shattered the treetops that only thy wrath could lay low, how could not thy lovers rejoice in thee, leader and lord of the year that exults to be born, so strong in thy strength, and so glad of thy gladness, whose laughter put winter and sorrow to scorn. So I put that. I have this textbook on poetry coming up, and I put that in there. I had to like widen the margins to keep the lines intact.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exhausting.
But I actually think that because he put in the alliteration,
Yeah.
like it kind of like perks. It keeps perking you. So every time you think you're about to go down, it throws you back up. Anyway, I had a lot of fun reading that.
I
My
love that. I
medieval
see that.
book.
Yeah. Yeah. What's this poetry book you're talking about?
I'm excited about this. Yeah, so Roman Roads Media is like a curriculum company. They're kind of focused on great books that I used to use them when we homeschooled my kids back in South Carolina. And but I'm in the town where they're based now, and I work in education and managed to make some connections. And they're going to print this textbook. That is, it is it's for older high school and for early college, and it's not strictly a poetry appreciation textbook. Like my hope is that it will be a how to be a poet, or how to think of language and the world poetically. How to basically, I want the book to help people become poets, not necessarily in a pseudo vocational way like you and I might think of ourselves, but
Mm.
just that just to approach language constantly
Mm.
through poetry, right? Like, if you're going to have, use language with dominion, if you're going to steward it well and help it flourish, there's going to be truth, beauty, and goodness. And the beauty is always the part we seem to neglect.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to, that it can be used to make poets of people as much as they're willing to collaborate in that process.
And so is this like what's kind of the content? Is it anthology like, or is it actually like essays written by you at kind of exploring different aspects of poetry, like meter and form? And
Yeah. So, I mean, there's going to be an anthology accompanying it, which I think is going to end up being like 300 pages long,
nice.
which I'm excited about. And
Yeah.
it is very, ever since I was a kid, like I loved collecting different poetry anthologies, and like I still have like a 1918 Oxford, whatever that classic, that very famous. They all are always putting on new editions. Oxford Collection of Verse, I think it's called. So I have a
Okay.
1918 copy I picked up when I was like 14 years old. I still have it.
Ooh.
I love anthologies. I am pretty pleased that this anthology, I think, is really distinct from anything else that's been done. The idea behind it is that it's poems that I think every Christian should read or should have read. Which is not to say poems by Christians or poems about Christian themes. But it does what that did was it freed me from any sense of responsibility for including poems I think are terrible, that the consensus is they're great. I was willing to go against the consensus on this.
Yeah. Who's somebody like
I mean,
that?
I made some concessions, but like it meant that I could put in one little thing from Shelley and walk away and feel good about it.
Yeah.
I don't know what your opinion of Shelley is, but I hate him. So
Oh,
it's my anthology, and that's what I get to do.
I got dragged through the mud because I posted a note on Substack ranking all of the romantics, and I put Shelley down, not at the very bottom, but second to last.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And someone was like, "You should be way up higher."
Oh yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? This is a crime. But I put Byron last, and I got a lot of crap for that.
Dude. Those are my two. Those are the two that I was like, these guys are the worst. I wrote a really long, obnoxious, wandering article about the social problems in Latin America that were basically attributing them to romantic thinking, to bad romantic thinking. And Byron was like he featured in that because I mean, like he he obviously was not involved in the Americas, and I had another major character involved in that essay. But I mentioned Byron because Byron was a freedom fighter, right? He went to Greece and died very romantically of disease, but and he was a celebrity and a hero for it. Anyway, those two dudes are the worst. Shelley is worse than Byron, but I can't get past. This is actually an interesting topic we could maybe talk about some other day. But just the to what degree do you get past what you know about the artist?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think Byron's reputation I think gives him a lot of grace for his actual writing.
Yes.
I don't know how many people have actually read all of Don Juan, but I find it excruciating.
But you're to your point, like he is admired because of how he lived his life. Then imagine like being someone who thinks he wasted his life. It gives me no patience for his poetry, or for his book, or his writings.
No credit to his name. So you kept one poem by Shelley, and
I think
any other
so.
examples of I don't have to put this one in there. Are there any Are there any Christian writers that you think that you were happy to pull out of this anthology?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. No, I added more, if anything. Like, Edward Taylor, never gets anthologized, mostly because he's an American Puritan poet. He was a 20th century discovery, so that already has a big impact on his fame. But so I included some of his. I added a bunch of people. I didn't, I suppose. Yeah, I don't remember pulling anyone for the crime of cheesiness, which I think would be the easy one to level at Christian poets. I don't think they would have been in my radar screen in the first place.
Yeah, you kept in Swinburne too. I mean, that's his cheesiness level is very high in some of his poems.
Yeah, well, so there are individual poems, or like even like a poem that gets anthologized a lot that I definitely included is John Gillespie Magee's High Flight. It's a young man who died in World War II. How does it go? It's I have slipped the surly bonds of earth.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's the only poem of his that is really known because he died. And so I include some poems that I just think are great just cause, and I included bad poets with with a good poem, but someone like Shelley. And I know that some of it has been colored by what I know of his life, but I honestly don't like anything he's done.
Yeah, his life does color a lot of his poetry for me. The kind of radical progressivism that he represents, I think, also finds its way into a lot of his poetry. So that when I'm reading it, I feel like maybe I'm being propagandized to.
Precisely. Yes.
Not all of it. Yeah, I think there are some. I mean, there are some fine ones.
Well, and technically fine is definitely. This is why that Christians should read. But I'm not sure. I think Christians have no lack of, and there can certainly be more in the years to come. But there's no lack of technically adept poets. So it's not like we have to here's a brilliant way to write a sonnet and we have to show Shelley doing it. Although the anthology is one thing, the textbook is another. I talk at length about the Romantics and Shelley in the textbook, and even in writing the textbook I actually discovered that when Shelley wrote let's see here, what was it? There are two versions of this. Yeah. So Shelley wrote Ozymandias, and so did his friend. So they made a bet. Let's see if I can find
this.
That's
right, yeah.
I didn't know about this. I guess you've read about this, but Horace Smith was his name.
Yep.
They both decided to write a poem called Ozymandias about the same thing and see who could get it published first. And Shelley won. But the other poem is out there. And so I included it in the textbook and compared them. But the textbook itself is definitely like it spends plenty of time on technique, because I think with any art, you have to feel confident you can do a thing, even if it's I'm going to move away from this. I could, but I won't.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if I'm gonna look at a Rothko painting, like of just a red canvas, I want to know that he chose to do that,
Mm-hmm.
not that a red canvas was the only thing he could do.
Yeah.
Right? Um, and so it gives I think any nascent poet an opportunity to be confident, to just doodle and noodle and write limericks and begin to feel like, yeah, I'm kind of mastering these forms, and now I'm going to be a towering genius and invent stuff. But there is definitely plenty of examples and talk of an opportunity to like write your own stuff. The textbook is going to be published in kind of a workbook format, so you can write in the book.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, should be
That
cool.
sounds great.
Well, speaking of manuscripts, you were telling me that you have, like, off camera, that you've submitted a manuscript. Is it a collection of poetry recently?
Yeah, I've been working on it for the last 2 years. It's a longer, like book length poem. Uh, it's like a fantasy epic. Uh,
Really?
yeah, fantasy epic. I don't think it's actually publishable, but I sent it out and I got some people asking me to read some samples.
Okay.
Uh, which at least the last two that did roundly rejected it after that. And so I don't know how publishable it is, but I was working on this fantasy epic about trees.
Huh.
Because I live in Reno, which is a very short drive away from a lot of great redwood forests in California.
Oh
And
wow.
I'm
Okay.
a huge redwood forest fan, and I go hiking along the California coast if I can, at least once a year. Uh, and so I set myself the challenge partly because I love the vocabulary and the language associated with botany eh, and and that whole like field of study. And if I could write a book uh, just about trees,
Hmm.
uh, and so then I ended up turning it into an epic about a tree that grows very, very tall. So it's a redwood tree growing in a forest, and basically an allegory for. I guess I guess you could call it a Christian allegory uh, of like a tree growing tall in a forest that's maybe dying, and
Hmm.
the roots are rotten to the core, and how do you fix a forest that you're growing in from the inside? And uh,
Wow.
but yeah, I've been working on that. I think
Huh.
it's about like 60,000 words or like 10,000 lines, and
So how have people responded when you've told them you're writing a story where the hero is a tree?
they go, what? What do you mean? And I'm like,
I know
yeah,
what you
no,
mean though by like not publishable, dude. Like like one of the things I wanted to I thought we could talk about today, and I don't want to hijack this. I just want to
no,
connect
no,
it.
go for it, go for it.
But I've written a verse play, and I sent it off to a couple of publishers, also been rejected. But at the end of it, I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
There's a local kid who read it. He and my son read it together, um, and he liked it, and he asked me if he could put it on. So at least I'm going to get to see it, like, and maybe make some changes off or whatever. But like as far as like getting it, I think I've recently decided I think I'm just going to publish it myself, because like it's so many poetry publishers I think are very focused on publishing certain sorts of poetry, and very often the audience is other poets.
Hmm.
And so I think that starts to funnel. And I'm not trying to put it on the publishers, but I think it starts to funnel the tastes and what's of interest. And then when you pile on top of that, this is a super weird project, you know?
And is it weird because of the content of the play, or merely because it's a verse play? And
Oh, a little bit of both. Yeah. I mean, it's So it probably takes about 45 minutes to read out loud. I expect a performance will probably like take like an hour, but it it's sort of a parody of certain ideas in Greek mythology and and comparing them to Christian ideas. Um, but it's strongly so like the kid who wants to do it, he so I don't know if you've ever read like Eliot's Murder in the Cathedral.
Oh yeah.
It's quite stylized, but it still feels often very conversational. The verse in my thing is very rigid, and very structured, and it feels like it ought to be declaimed, and that's because it should be. Like the comment I made to the young man who wants to put it on, because he was wrestling with how to direct actors in it, because there's no real character development. So I was telling him, like, these are symbols, these are types. You could have masks on all of them for all that matters. It would be more useful. I think it's funny. It's supposed to be funny. It would be more useful to go to clown school than to acting class to to do well doing this. So it is weird. Like the kid called it avant-garde, which really distressed me.
Oh god.
But
It
like
sounds like
he was
one of those.
searching for words to say this is weird.
It sounds like one of those old, like old medieval masked plays where like that play Every Man, or right, like
Yeah,
they're
certainly
straight
kind of promotion.
allegorical,
Yep.
and it's mostly about the ideas that the characters represent or stand in
Yes.
for. It's something like
Precisely.
that.
And like a lot of those, at the end, I was actually kind of concerned, but like from people who have read it, it seems to play well. But I was concerned they would be too heavy-handed. At the end, it turns, and there is a sort of there's an obvious moral to it, and like and as the last person to speak, and she has a whole monologue, is Monica, the mother of Augustine, and it's very like she's simply a noble character telling us what all these things mean,
Mm.
like a lot of those medieval morality plays did.
Hmm.
So yeah, it is. I took a lot of inspiration from that. Yeah,
That's awesome. And so it will be performed at some
by
point
at
this
least some
year.
college kids.
Are
Yeah,
you
yeah,
gonna
this year.
record it and maybe put it up, or?
Yeah, actually, that would be a cool idea. Yeah, we'll have to see how the production is going to be taking shape and all that. But I don't know how this kid thinks he's paying for it, but I'm not paying for it. But hopefully it'll be a success. We'll see. But like as I'm just going to publish. I think I'll probably just sell it on my Substack. I might make it like a reward for supporting the Don Quixote project. That we'll talk about at some point. But
Yeah, I don't know
they
where do you publish. I know less about publishing plays than I do about trying to get anything else published, but it
exactly.
seems
Me
like
too.
it would be even harder than fiction or poetry, because it's it's even more niche than
Right.
that. Or maybe plays are bigger. I don't know. I don't even know the market for like publishing plays.
I used to be a bookseller. Like I had a bookshop, and I don't know. I have the impression, So I've had some friends in theater. I was actually even on the board of a theater troupe, and yet I know nothing of the world of theater. But like so my wife is a visual artist, and was like her formal training, her schooling is all in the visual arts, and I've always been a writer. Um, so especially on her end of things, but for both of us, we're well acquainted with the echo chamber that a lot of modern arts have become, where artists are just talking to each other. They make
Hmm.
things for each other to praise. And occasionally, like, one of the, someone from the actual elite classes will give you their benison, and you can sell your painting for $5 million. But mostly we're just talking to each other.
Hmm.
And I think theater is definitely like one of those worlds. I think that the literary world is the least subject to that.
Hmm.
And I think the visual arts probably the most subject to that. But in talking to theater people and just the little vibes I get here and there, it feels like theater is a little closer to that echo chamber thing than I know how to navigate. I just don't know how you would navigate that. And I like the idea of, I'd love to, like, so my collection of poetry that was recently published a couple years ago was published by a regular publisher.
Oh yeah.
Which made me feel amazing because you may be able to tell from the way I write, but I explicitly try not to write to other poets and artists, and like I want to be able to, like, so when like oil men from Alberta, I mentioned that specifically because I'm going on an oil man from Alberta's podcast tomorrow. But like when he wants to write me about like the poems of mine that he loves and that his family was reading this thing or that feels amazing to me, like way more amazing than the applause of other poets. So anyway, I was really happy to be published by a regular publisher. I'd love to have something like this play be published that way, but like, who would? Like, how would you market it? How would you connect it? I don't even know.
I don't know either, but yeah, I pick up on your style. It does seem accessible, maybe accessible in the sense that it's not written in a densely idiosyncratic way. Like you had that one recently that you published on Substack about the greatest sonnet ever written, and which is a lovely poem with a lovely sentiment. And by the end of it, you can understand what the sentiment is, and it's clear, and the emotional impact of that, especially in that last line, where he goes back to his house, or he's in his house and he realizes like kind of what he's got.
Yeah.
Or everyone in the family realizes what they've got too when this guy nails his writing. But themes that are very accessible and very relatable, and I think that's what maybe drew me to your work originally, is that you can read it even if you just are a casual reader, not even of poetry, but just a casual reader in general. You can pick up some of your stuff and get into it without much of a learning curve, which is very hard to find in poetry.
Which and I enjoy dense self-referential poetry as much. I think anyone who actually writes poetry does.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I love my elusive poems.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's because I maybe in that field, and I know it well enough, like just like in any field that you get good enough in and more expert at, that you can really dig into the technical side deeper.
Yep.
But for the general audience, being able to pull back from that and just experience a poem maybe for what it is in its broadest sense, which I think is just like the use of figurative language, figures of thought, figures of sound, as a way to stimulate the imagination and to please the ear, right? Like I think that's essentially what it's about. And I think you do that very well in your poems.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, like the whole idea of like, sparking the imagination, helping people to live imaginative lives. I mentioned earlier on in our conversation, like having dominion over language. Like this is probably like an educator teacher thing, but that you and I share. But I want to make people noble. I want to ennoble people and help them seek after nobility. And I believe that the best, like if you can only give one tool to someone to help them be noble, it would be mastery of language.
Yeah.
Yeah,
being able to articulate yourself. I was just talking about this with my wife the other day. We have a kid who's just turned 6, and she she just started using the phrase, "Oh, this makes me jealous." And her friends are having a birthday party, and so we get presents for them, and she says, "Oh, my friend's presents that we got her are really making me jealous because I want them." And it was, I was so proud of her, because like usually, even just like less than a year ago, she would, when jealousy arose in her, she would just get angry and lash out.
right.
But understanding the concept and being able to express it has given her some sort of power over her emotions. And
Precisely.
so now, she can say like, "Oh, I'm I'm jealous of this without like having an emotional outburst. And she has this mastery over it, which I think is just a cool microcosm of what it means to be able to use language at any level, like being able to articulate our thoughts and ideas to ourselves and to others gives us this power over our emotions and maybe our baser impulses that would otherwise control us. But an example, I think, to your point that you're talking about.
Yeah. Man gave names.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah. That's very cool. Well, one of the things I wanted to do before we ended our conversation, we're not in a hurry, but I wanted to plug my Don Quixote project.
Oh yeah,
I don't know how much you're following that.
I read the first chapter that you
Nice.
published on Substack, which I thought was fantastic, and I hadn't read Don Quixote since college.
Okay.
I read it in high school but I didn't get all the way through it, and then I read it in college, and so it's been maybe 12 years, maybe. So reading your translation of the first chapter refreshed it for me, and made me want to get back in there and reread the whole thing. Which maybe I'll wait until you've published your translation then and just read that one. But yeah, tell me about that. How's that going? And
yeah, so I'm about to this week sometime I expect to put up chapter 2. So still early days. I'm hoping to get it done within 6 months or so. Really hitting it hard in the summer, especially, and have then the hardback illustrated hardbacks in people's hands by the end of the year. It's my hope.
So
I'm trying to sell 1,000.
In 6 months.
The whole book, yeah. It's going to be cranking.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I'm trying to sell a bunch so I can basically make it my full-time job for 3 or 4 months.
Gotcha.
So it is definitely ambitious. So years ago, one of the first book crowdfunding things that went viral, I think maybe the first, was this Bible. This was back in maybe, I don't know, 2013 or so. Anyway, it's in the living room right now, but I was one of the early adopters of that particular project. And it was it made all these big news stories and all this. It was, just an early crowdfunding success story. It was supposed to happen in a year. It ended up taking, I think, 4. He even so I have the Apocrypha. It's a 3-volume set of all of the Protestant canon. I also have the bonus copy of the Apocrypha, which went out to all the original buyers who had to wait for 4 years. Anyway, it was a very cool project, but that time that it took kind of really took a lot of the fun and joy out of it for me as someone who had, even though they were very communicative and they ran into problems they didn't anticipate, problems which, those problems at least I won't run into because I'm creating the text myself by translating it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I don't want to do that to people. So I'll be pouring myself into this, and I hope that by the end of the year, people can have copies in their own hands.
That sounds awesome. What's your, I don't know, your experience maybe with the language or with the translating in general? Have you done any other translations or?
Yeah. So I said I was a teacher earlier on. So I teach high school and now. But my most of my career I spent teaching English as a second language in the corporate world.
Gotcha.
Or teaching Spanish or Portuguese. I'm fluent in both of those. I am Brazilian. My mother was raised in Peru. So, for example, I've never read all of Don Quixote in English.
Okay.
So that's yeah. All right. I really there are good translations out there. I'm not going to say there are not. I think there are some bad translations out there, but there's some good ones. But I really feel like none of them hit the thing that, at least when I was reading Don Quixote, I find it to be a much more, of course, it is a satire, and it is definitely punching the air out of a bunch of balloons. And it's very sarcastic and ironic often, all the time. There are all these layers of what is meant sincerely and what is not. But at the end of the day, I think that that most people, especially non-Spaniards or non-Spanish speakers tend to read it through the eyes of the Enlightenment. They tend to think of it like as a Candide, and it is, they see it as like, it just comes across as a lot meaner than what my reading experience was.
Gotcha.
I
Yeah.
just think it's a lot more joyful and a lot more earnest. I think Quixote is an example of, even while the air is being taken out of, the medieval chivalric romances and poems that, they're like an obvious main target. People interpret that as like, being against Christianity or chivalry or nobility. I think Don Quixote is supposed to be a model to us of nobility, a ridiculous one, so that it forces us to really think about whether we want to pay the price for true nobility. But like, so I want to make a translation that will hopefully, without, some people may hear that and think, well, he's going to totally change the work, because that's their interpretation of it, right? He's going to totally change the work, and there's every translator is going to have an agenda. That's what sparks you to make a translation in the first place, to think you can do better.
We had to have
and
an
I
idea.
just think it's a much gladder thing.
Yeah, to have an idea of it that maybe somebody else hasn't had before, a take on it.
Right.
And your take is pre-Enlightenment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's far more medieval than most people think it is as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I had never really connected the two. In my mind, they do always seem they've always seemed separate. But yeah, it is happening in that same world. Is it what? Trying to think. He's like 14. Is he in the 1500s completely?
He is early 1500s. So it's so first of all, and this is just going to show you more of my perspective, I consider the Reformation the culmination of Christendom and the medieval era, rather than it is also the opening of the modern era. But I think most people want to talk about the modernity starts with the Reformation. I would actually, orient it more toward Christendom and the medieval era. So it is, one of the things that's important about Quixote is that it is in the context of the Reformation, of a lot of modern ideas beginning to come to the fore. Yes. But even of the struggle against the Ottomans that all of Christendom was engaged in. Cervantes fought at the Battle of Lepanto. He was a prisoner of Moorish lords, waiting to be ransomed for, I think, 9 years.
Oh yeah, isn't that where most of it was in the prison cell?
No, and it's funny. Quixote was actually like a side project for him. He wasn't very impressed with it. He wrote the sequel because so it's 2 parts. He wrote one part, huge bestseller, and people kept pushing him to write a sequel and to kind of close the deal, because things are kind of, because he wrote it sort of episodically. So it really was not a point of focus for him. I think, and this is a commonly held theory, no one really knows why, but I think that he wrote the sequel because another guy wrote a sequel and it was a bestseller using the Quixote character.
Oh, really?
And you can go find it. You can go find like the fake Quixote out there.
Interesting.
And Cervantes actually put characters from the not the pirated copy, but basically the stolen book. He put characters from that in his second volume and totally mocked them, of course. But yeah, his true passion was getting his plays published and performed. And
I had no idea he had plays.
Exactly.
Are they any good? Do people still?
I don't really know. I haven't read them.
I never read them.
Exactly. Yeah. So it wasn't even like I imagine that a lot of it, he must have had so much time to think. He didn't spend those 9 years like in dungeons. I mean, he probably did plenty of time in dungeons, but this was like his family was noble but poor. So they were ransoming him. And no one, it took years for his family and friends to gather enough money to ransom him. But, I would imagine that most of the time he spent on parole, like a limited, being able to walk around, but not with any work or vocation. So I imagine he had plenty of time to map lots of things out. But yeah, but he wrote Don Quixote in Spain.
And what's your take on how he views these kinds of codes of chivalry that Cervantes becomes obsessed with and then tries to embody? Is he, do you see him as poking fun at it, or is finding some value in it?
He's definitely poking fun at it, but I think in a loving way. And I think this is one of the things that translations miss. Like there are ways, like we're all familiar with parodies. First of all, we don't know how to use the word parody. Like we think that, like Al Yankovic does not do parodies. Right? He does funny songs to the tune of another song.
Yeah.
But that's not what a parody is. But so satire, parody, whatever. You can tell, like if someone made a movie that was a satire of the high school experience, even though it'd be making fun of it, you could tell if that guy loved high school or hated it. Like if he wants to tear it all down, or if he thinks wasn't that hilarious. And I think that there's a lot more love for the things he's poking at than a lot of readers and translators have really understood. And I think that the Spanish are evidence for that. I mean, Quixote is the national hero, and as much as the people may be willing to poke fun at themselves, you wouldn't be able to bear that if he weren't truly heroic in some sense. But I think and I say all of this while being a Cervantes scholar, but I think that the key argument actually for the fact that this is a loving parody is that he wrote epic Homeric plays. Like he was like most other Mediterranean writers of the time. Like they wrote with explicit reference all the time to the classics, and he did too. And that was the stuff he valued more. Like he valued that stuff more than he valued his own works, his own famous works, more than he valued Don Quixote, which tells me that he had a sincere, earnest heart. Like he really wanted to. He wasn't trying to tear things down, and that he honored the past. Although very early on in the book, there's a book burning scene, which is hilarious. So he comes back from his first little foray out, and he's obviously sick and crazy because he goes crazy because he's reading all these fantasy. Well, you've read you read it back in high school, but yeah. So when his priest friend, they start collecting these books to burn, they go through the list of books. He explicitly pulls out a Cervantes book and was like, this was trash. And they throw, because they save a few. They save 3 or 4, which is really interesting which ones get saved. Yeah. This one got saved. Let's see, where is it? This one got saved. And this is actually this is the epic poem of Chile, the conquest of Chile, the founding poem of Chile.
Yeah.
And it's completely it is constantly referring back to Homer. And the Mapuche Indians are the Trojans, and the Spaniards are the Greek, and it's explicitly repeated again and again. And specific heroes get compared to. So the Mapuche are very noble, and because of that, right? They have to be worthy enemies. Anyway, this gets saved from the bonfire, but Cervantes burns his own stuff, which is hilarious to me.
That's great. It's good. You got to be self-deprecating.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the fun I'm having. I'm trying. I'm pushing it on folks, and as thou lovest me, buy a copy, and all that, trying to get word out, and yeah. So I appreciate you letting me talk about it.
Yeah, I'm definitely supportive, and will be throwing my hat in the ring there. I feel like we need. I feel like there's room on Substack for a community of independent writers and the means to establish themselves if maybe they're not able to in traditional media, which has so many of its problems. And I feel like we have the technologies and the tools to be able to do it ourselves. And so something like this is so cool. And so you're going to be self-publishing it, I assume, and then are there going to be illustrations or cover designs? Are you doing all that stuff yourself as well, or?
Well, I'm going to try to. So I'm actually using that play I told you about to practice using Scribus and to put together a book. But I will probably, end up outsourcing that, and funding it from I've built in obviously the printing costs and all that as best as I can estimate. But yeah, it's going to be illustrated. So my wife is doing the illustrations, and here I'll show you. Oops. This is
you said she's a visual artist. Yeah.
Right. So this is her website. So Kimberly Swait. But she does lino cuts.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so we'll just do she's already working on a few I guess that won't just open, but she's already working on a few Quixote lino cuts, which I think would be a cool vibe.
That's a good style. Yeah. I associate Don Quixote illustrations so much with Gustave Doré. I have one, like, probably everybody's favorite book illustrator. I don't know if there's a better book illustrator than Doré, but his work for Don Quixote is so great.
It is. Yeah. And especially like when the adventure scenes are cool, but my favorite image from Doré is when he's sitting in his room. You imagine it's at the beginning of the tale, but all these fantasies are kind of crowding around him.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. What a fantastic image. So yeah, I believe Doré mostly worked in etchings. Yeah, and I feel like lino cuts give like a primitivist etching vibe.
Yeah. It's the same maybe. Almost the same genre, but yeah, something different enough that it can have its own style and flavor, maybe, but still like echoing those classic illustrations. That's awesome, man.
That's the hope.
I'm excited for it.
Yeah, me too. Well, it's been really fun hanging out and chatting. I don't know how we bumped into each other on Substack. I mean, we must read some people in common or have common readers, but
I think we do. Yeah.
But when I see you pop up in my feed, I'm like, oh yeah. So I appreciate you.
You as well. There's some people when their work comes out, it's you pay attention to it and you check it out, and you're definitely one of those too. And yeah, I think you're gonna maybe try to join us in maybe a month or so, where we're trying to put together like a little writers meeting with some of the other people in there. So I think Tullius reached out to you as well.
That's right. Yeah. I've got it on my calendar.
Awesome, man. I'll probably see you there then.
Awesome. So I'm gonna end the recording now. We can say goodbye to everyone, but you don't have to leave this little studio space. We can say a private goodbye. Off camera. All right. So long, everyone. Thanks for watching.
See you guys.
What day is it today? Remind me.
It's Sunday, Mr. Pinch.
Sunday. And what do we do on a Sunday morning, wherever we happen to be? We go to church, you bloody heathen!